Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, and I'd like to remind participants of the two following items. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. All comments should be addressed through the chair. Members, please raise your hand if you wish to speak, whether participating in person or via Zoom. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can. And pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted on September 19th, 2024, the committee resumes its study of Russian interference and disinformation campaigns in Canada. And I would like to now welcome our witnesses. As an individual, David Pugliese, journalist of the Ottawa Citizen, welcome. And Canadian Association of Journalists President Brent Joly, welcome. And I would now like to invite you both, starting with Mr. Pugliese, to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Mr. Pugliese, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for granting me the opportunity to speak to you. I had no intention of appearing before this committee, but when my reputation and profession was attacked, I felt compelled to offer some truth and balance to your discussion. On October 24, 2024, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Chris Alexander came before this committee and accused me of being a traitor to my country. Hiding behind a cloak of parliamentary privilege, he falsely claimed that I had been recruited as a Russian spy in the 1980s and suggested I am still working as a Russian agent. His preposterous claims were based on several pieces of paper he told you had been examined by experts around the world. Astonishingly, not one MP on the committee raised a single critical question about these explosive allegations involving a veteran Canadian journalist with a 40-year track record. It is the height of irony that a committee studying disinformation would in fact propagate it. The records presented to you by Mr. Alexander are replete with factual errors and falsehoods. The records claim I was a permanent resident of Ottawa when the Russians supposedly decided to examine my background. I was not even living in Ottawa at the time cited in the records tabled by Mr. Alexander. Alexander testified the files show I was working at my first job at the Ottawa Citizen throughout the 1980s. That is also false. Although Mr. Alexander claimed there are actual studies authenticating his assertions, nothing was provided to this committee, and no one asked for them. Mr. Alexander's fabricated claims are not only outlandish, but are dangerous to my family. There are now calls that I be executed or tortured, and that my family be deported. In short, this committee effectively played host to character assassination without authenticating any of the allegations. In my line of work, no credible journalist in this country would ever publish such wild, damaging allegations based on flimsy assertions. If Mr. Alexander's document is real, or documents are real, it, at best, suggests the Russians looked at my background, which was a common occurrence for journalists, academics, and politicians during the Cold War. How many other Canadians are on this list? Mr. Alexander, in his presentation to the committee, suggests my journalism helps the Russians and divides Canadians, and yet nothing is further from the truth. Over the last 4 decades, I have exposed financial wrongdoing at National Defence, sexual assault in the Canadian Forces, and bungled military procurements which put our troops at risk. My award-winning articles have helped countless Canadian veterans and military personnel, and I've pushed for accountability, transparency, and truthfulness. But I know that when journalists like myself expose wrongdoing of governments and institutions, it can be uncomfortable for decision makers. As we learned in the aftermath of this committee, the claim that I was a Russian asset has been circulated for several years by Canadian Forces leaders. That doesn't come as a surprise to me. Military public affairs officers have acknowledged that during my time at the Ottawa Citizen, there have been no less than 3 attempts by senior D&D officials to convince my employer to remove me from the defense beat. In 2013, the National Post reported that I was put under military police investigation after a senior official in the defense minister's office falsely claimed I published classified information. After a 2-month investigation, military police concluded that the data I published was actually taken from a U.S. Navy press release. Once again, there are ridiculous claims being made by those who are uncomfortable with fact-based journalism, and my journalism in particular. The job of a journalist is to hold the powerful to account, and I will continue doing so. In my view, Canada appears to be entering a dangerous new era. Labeling people who don't follow the approved government narrative as an enemy to this country is slanderous and irresponsible. Surely, a parliamentary committee should embrace higher standards when it comes to protecting the reputation of its citizens. While these allegations were made about me personally, there is little doubt that this was an attack on credible journalism at a time when we need it most. Journalism is a core pillar of our democracy, protecting public interest. I am a proud Canadian. I'm proud of my journalism career, and I intend to keep holding governments to account. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for your remarks, Mr. Pugliese. I now invite Mr. Joly to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you all for agreeing to hear me out here today and for the opportunity to address the committee, the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. While I wholeheartedly endorse the study that this committee is undertaking to look into Russian disinformation and interference campaigns in Canada, that's not exclusively the reason why I'm here today. I'm joining you here today as the president of the Canadian Association of Journalists, which is an organization that has existed since 1978, so more than 45 years, to represent the interests of journalists, to undertake advocacy and support the public's right to know. I'm here because of the allegations that were levied against Mr. Pugliese in the October 24th meeting by Mr. Alexander. As David has noted, Mr. Alexander declared, under the guise of parliamentary privilege, I might add, that he's been a paid agent of the KGB since the 1980s. It is absolutely astonishing to me that no member of this committee posed questions about or challenged these patently absurd claims when they were tabled. On the evening of October 24th, the Canadian Association of Journalists issued a public statement to our more than 22,000 Twitter followers, and we also represent the interests of more than 1,000 journalists across the country. The CAJ, and the statement read, the CAJ wholeheartedly denounces the ridiculous accusations made against David Pugliese today. It is a sad irony that these comments were made in a meeting examining disinformation campaigns. These claims are dangerous and designed to undermine the credibility of journalists, period. Now, I'm happy to be here today, sitting shoulder to shoulder with David, to call out these accusations and allegations that are nothing more, in my view, than a McCarthy-esque smear job. Over 40 years, David has built a reputation as a reporter who has exposed untold levels of corruption in Canada. He has won multiple awards, not just from the Canadian Association of Journalists, but also from the National Newspaper Awards, where I also sit as a governor, and for his coverage on issues as diverse as defense issues, looking into and investigating the government and security agencies who are attempting to stifle free speech and legitimate protests. Now, the function of journalists is to make sure that taxpayers know how public dollars are being spent. And frankly, our Constitution upholds the role journalists play in serving our democracy. But Mr. Pugliese has been tarnished unnecessarily and is guilty of nothing more than being a journalist. He is a habitual thorn in the side of those in power, but that's just him doing his job. The accusations you have heard from Mr. Alexander in this committee are dumbfounding and dangerous. They are, regrettably, becoming the new normal. Weaponized disinformation campaigns put journalists in the veritable crosshairs. Rather than question, for example, the accuracy of facts reported in a story, domestic and transnational interests now attack a journalist's credibility. That's because if you can't refute the truth, then the next best action is to attack the messenger. These kinds of attacks are isolating and psychologically taxing. In a time when newsrooms have thinner and thinner resources, or worse, when you're a freelancer who doesn't have an affiliation to a newsroom, these kind of statements and ridiculous allegations send a collective chill across the free expression landscape. You know, I think our foreign adversaries, including Russia, will cheer in collective celebration when we begin to suspect each other. Disinformation attacks the very foundations of our democracy and the individuals who serve in it, and that includes journalists. I hope members of this committee will carefully reflect on how this close-to-home example of a disinformation campaign can strike. Disinformation changes lives, they damage reputations, and all in the stroke of a pen. It's for that reason I hope the mindless maligning of Mr. Pugliese will not go unnoticed in the final draft of this committee's report. We'll be watching, and we look forward to reading it in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. We will now start our rounds of questions. Each individual will have 6 minutes. Mr. Shipley, you're up first, and go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to, sincerely thank you to both witnesses for being here today. It's an honor and a pleasure to have you both here. I would always believe in any situation, everybody has the right to come and defend themselves and speak the truth, so thank you both. I'm going to say a little bit first before I get into a few questions here. You brought up some very good points. I've now been an MP for 5 years, and I've been sat on a few committees. Mainly, I've been on public safety, but some other ones. And we have witnesses come in to our meetings all the time, and they give us their, I'm going to use for lack of terms, side of their stories or their information they believe in. So this has put us in quite an interesting position here, and it's going to always make me think going forward what's real and what's not real. And it's very interesting that it's, and please don't take this glibly, that it's come up in a study about disinformation that this has taken place. I have obviously spent some time reflecting on that. I find that a little ironic. So perhaps, Mr. Pugliese, before we get into some questions, if there's any good, obviously, because I know you've been through a tough time and can come through this, is that perhaps maybe our eyes will be a little bit more open to disinformation, and that will be part of our study and our remarks going forward. So I do have some questions, though. I'll start with Mr. Pugliese, and I hope I'm saying that right. I think I'm pretty close there.
Thank you.
Obviously, this has been a very tough time for you. I listened to your words very intently. You did mention, obviously, this has had some effect on you and your family. One of the first things I want to say was my feelings go to you and your family. And how has this affected you and your family with these allegations?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to get into too much of that, if that's okay. I mean, we have increased security around the house, so there has been a component about that, just to protect the kids. As far as direct impact, there is that. There's been a lot of support that I've received. And ironically, now my email box is full of tips from Canadian Forces personnel about wrongdoing that they want me to investigate. So I guess I've got my work cut out for many months to come. But I prefer not to get into some of the security aspects, please.
Yeah, I wasn't, and I understand, I respect that. I wasn't as much looking for what you've done. That I was looking for maybe how much. Because it affected your family. Because what I'm trying to do here is draw a picture of maybe going forward. Our words are important, and the words that witnesses say are important. So I was just trying to draw a picture of how much this has affected you and your family, not specifics as to what your security around your family. So I understand that. Mr. Pugliese, another question. Since we are studying Russian disinformation, do you have any thoughts on how the government can address Russia's use of disinformation and information manipulation? Obviously, you're living through it right now. Maybe you can give us your opinion on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think these committees have to be very careful at looking at the evidence that's being presented. So in December 2023, I covered a Senate Fisheries Committee, and I watched a so-called disinformation expert who works for the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, which Mr. Alexander works for, and this individual made a link between the Russians and Vladimir Putin and Ryan Reynolds, the Canadian actor. So Putin and the Russians have put out disinformation about the Canadian seal hunt. Ryan Reynolds is an animal activist, and he has put out a documentary about the Canadian seal hunt, which hasn't been complimentary. And so I watched this committee, this disinformation expert, link Ryan Reynolds and Putin together. And so I came away from that, and words as a committee member has mentioned are very important. And if Ryan Reynolds can be linked to the Russians and Russian disinformation, then no Canadian will be safe from any such smears.
Thank you for that. Mr. Jolly, I'd like to ask you a question next, if I could. You mentioned that your organization was started in 1978, which is 45 years. Have you ever seen a case like this in journalism, and how have your association reacted to it, or what have you done to prevent this, the disinformation side of it going forward, of your journalists?
Absolutely. I mean, this is quite different in its own right. The fact that it was asserted by a former cabinet minister in a standing committee of, a democratically operated organization. I think that is something that really takes the cake. But I think we also need to be really aware of the challenges that journalists are facing out in the field every day in covering, protests and injunction zones. We've seen, photojournalists who are having their access restricted when they're trying to go out and cover wildfires in BC or in Alberta. These are all part and parcel. This is part of the shrinking, press freedom environment that we're seeing. And I think what Mr. Pugliese has experienced is certainly part and parcel with it. It does sort of give me a sense of exasperation, the degree to which these accusations were made, again, within the context of a committee. I think it was a really bad look.
Thank you. The time is up, and we'll go to Ms. O'Connell. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both for being here today. I just want to start out, certainly from our perspective and my perspective. I think, Mr. Joly, you said in your opening it was dumbfounding and dangerous, and I don't disagree. I think what's important to know, however, is that we don't see what a witness might come and say in advance. In fact, I can speak for myself, as the testimony was happening and what I was hearing, and Mr. Alexander was referring to documents, and I know that we were turning to each other saying, what documents? And then when we looked, I had noticed that on the committee day, we had received them in and around 12:30, I believe. I can clarify that. And on a given sitting day, I'm sure you can appreciate I had not, and I think a number of our colleagues had not, including in that testimony, Mr. Alexander kept referring to Stewart. And I remember saying to myself, I need to look at these documents. And so I'm not downplaying anything, but I want you to know that I think we were equally as confused and were not understanding the connection. Mr. Bazan then asked specific questions that then named you that were eventually, when I got home and was actually able to go through and read all of the documents, I saw that. But it's not to make an excuse. It was just to outline the timelines from our perspective, because I, too, was very confused of what was actually being alleged. And from my perspective, and I can't speak for all colleagues, we had not seen it in advance, because I agree with both of your testimony in regards to a study on Russian disinformation. Our intention of this committee is certainly not to allow or purport the continuation of it. So I just want to acknowledge that again, not to dismiss the very real concerns, but to paint a little bit of a picture of, I think, some of that same dumbfounding confusion that we were experiencing in real time. I certainly was experiencing in real time, trying to get my eyes on those documents as we're also preparing questions as witnesses are sitting there. So other colleagues can certainly speak to their experience. But just on that, you've mentioned, Mr. Pugliese, the extreme concern and the dangerous situation for your family and the increased security, and I'm deeply sorry that you are experiencing that. That was one of my questions, but I want to ask, actually, in Mr. Alexander's opening remarks, he said, quote, "Previous efforts to expose this journalist's long-running covert ties to Moscow has resulted in attempts to intimidate current and former Canadian parliamentarians, including my former colleague James Bazan, as well as Canadian Army officials," end quote. Are you aware of any of those efforts? Again, this testimony, I'd served on a committee with Mr. Bazan on national defense. I have never heard these accusations. Do you have any idea where that is coming from or why this was presented that day?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So when I heard that, I thought we're entering into a territory of unhinged testimony. I couldn't believe it. So I don't know Mr. Bazan. He has used information from my articles and raised it in the House of Commons to hold the government to account, which is fine. In 2018, I wrote an article, in fact, supporting Mr. Bazan when a senior Canadian Forces public affairs officer by the name of Colonel Jay Jansen was dictating to Mr. Bazan on social media on what he should, as a parliamentarian, ask. And so I did an article quoting Mr. Bazan, and this isn't a proper, parliamentarians shouldn't be told what they can be asking in Parliament. When I heard that, I was just flabbergasted. It was, it's crazy. I don't want to get into too many details where I live now, but I don't live in Ottawa. I live 5,000 miles away, and I've never intimidated Mr. Bazan. I don't know what that is about, or any other Canadian Forces officers.
Thank you. I didn't understand. And like I said, most of the testimony was also referring to the journalist as, quote, Stewart. And it wasn't until later that, again, we were even kind of putting those pieces together. Just for the record, perhaps, have you ever published a story where the Kremlin was your source? I'm sorry, but I want the
Yes.
opportunity on the record.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. So, no, I have never published a story where the Kremlin was my source. I have done one interview with the spokesman from the Russian embassy who is given the boot from Canada, and that was published. Most of my sources are Canadian Forces records, that I acquire through the Access to Information Law, Canadian Forces statements, and Canadian Forces personnel usually coming to me for help because they're getting, for want of a better word, jerked around by the chain of command. And if you follow most of my stories, you'll see that those are stories that I do a lot of.
Thank you. And again, just in fairness, I wasn't saying it to promote that.
Sure.
I wanted you to have the opportunity on the record to address
Thank you,
that.
Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Thank you, Mr. Pugliese. Over to Ms. Michaud for 6 minutes, please. Go ahead.
Merci, Madame. Pardon. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As has done Member McConnell, I understand that you were quite upset about what happened on the 24th of October last. The committee didn't seem to question anything that Mr. Alexander said. I was trying to understand what he was about, but I didn't understand the gravity of the accusations or affirmations that he was making. We didn't have much time in advance to look at any of the documents, but we have a former minister who's now working for a credible think tank, I believe, and the allegations put forward for which he purported to have documentary support. I don't know of you very much, Mr. Pugliese, but I'm glad that the committee has provided you an opportunity to give us your version of the facts. These are serious allegations brought to you. Global News seems to have consulted a few experts on this particular matter, and that the documents presented by Mr. Alexander appeared to be legitimate, but that does not suggest in any way that you were a Russian spy or that you were working for Russia, but the KGB would probably have you under surveillance like any number of journalists or other persons of interest in Canada in their estimation. So when we take a look at the analysis of others on that list, I suppose, there's nothing untoward in their record of behavior. So why would you think that the KGB would be interested in you? I mean, privately, of your own personal opinion, why would they be looking for you, at you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, first of all, when Global took a look at the documents, their experts pointed out that they don't show anything. They don't show that I received any money or anything of the sort that Mr. Alexander claimed. What the Soviets did during the 1980s was look at all kinds of individuals, journalists, politicians, as I mentioned, academics. I found it interesting that whoever wrote these documents up was not aware of me, because a lot of the dates where I'm supposed to be in Ottawa, I wasn't. They described me as a leftist activist. Well, throughout the 80s, I was working for military publications. I was correspondent for a Washington publication called Armed Forces Journal, which was produced for the U.S. Army. So we were writing stories about how to nuke the Soviets off the face of the earth, how to, get more weapons, the need for NATO expansion, that type of thing. So that doesn't appear to me as someone who's a leftist activist. And so that's why these documents, I don't know where they came from. And maybe that you should ask Mr. Alexander. He said they came from Ukraine. He didn't give specifics. Mm-hmm. Why would the Soviets look at me? If they did, I think that's just standard operating procedure for most journalists during the Cold War, most academics, and most politicians.
Je vous remercie. C'est assez ironique comme
Thank you. It's quite ironic, as my colleagues have said, that these allegations are occurring while we are studying disinformation. What would Mr. Alexander have to gain by making these allegations with the so-called proofs that he had in hand? Why did he target you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know what was going through Mr. Alexander's brain. I have covered Mr. Alexander before, so for the F-35 file, F-35 fighter jet file, when he was on that. I covered the Afghan war. I exposed, which he was, kind of a lead on. I exposed a lot of stories about corruption in the Afghan National Army. I exposed the existence of a child sex ring among Afghan national security forces where they would sell children. I have a reputation, and I'm proud of it, of, I guess, being a journalist who does journalism. And so, but again, I can't speak to Mr. Alexander's motives. I have covered him in the past.
Il y a Alex Koch qui a publié une lettre ouverte.
Alex Koch, who published a letter last February, covered by a number of journalists, was asking Mr. Alexander to provide proof of what he was what.
And ask in the next round. Your time is up. Thank you. Mr. McGregor, you have 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
It's been a long week.
Welcome to both of you to our committee, and yeah, wow, October 24th was quite the committee for me to miss that day. Honestly, we, like Ms. O'Connell said, we just had no idea that this kind of testimony was going to come forward. We actually received the documents from Mr. Alexander in an email at 12:21 p.m. The committee started at 3:46 p.m. that day. And, I've got many years of experience at committee, and in my experience, when a witness is both handing in documents and testifying, the documents can provide a good reference point, but I tend to put more weight on the testimony. And in my practices, if we are going to quote extensively or use a witness's particular information given at a committee during the drafting phase, those are always helpful to come back to. But my staff person was giving me updates from the committee and was describing in real terms how sideways it suddenly went from Mr. Alexander's testimony. And yeah, we don't have much experience where someone will come before a committee, be protected by parliamentary privilege, and just go after someone in the way that he did. I guess, Mr. Pugliese, we wanted to afford you the same parliamentary protection and give you the time and space here at this public committee that Mr. Alexander was afforded. Mr. Alexander did say, in his statements that he had shared these documents with national security authorities in Canada. Outside of October 24th, was this the first time you had heard about this? Have you ever had someone from an official position in Canada come to contact you about these documents?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I have never been visited by any security personnel. I've never been visited by CSIS, RCMP, whatever agencies there are. I've had a long association with the Canadian Forces. For instance, I have gone overseas on multiple occasions with Canadian Special Forces on an exclusive basis, and you can be sure that they have taken a close look at my background before they allow me access to some of the sensitive things that they do. So to answer your question, no one has. We haven't heard anything.
Mm-hmm. And to borrow the line of questioning from my colleague, Ms. Michaud, do you have any further thoughts on just what you think might have prompted Mr. Alexander to go down this? Can you search your memory for in any way that you might have crossed paths, affected him personally? I mean, I know as parliamentarians, it's the nature of the job to sometimes feel the rough edge of the press. That's a normal part of public service. But yeah, this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what struck me is Mr. Alexander seemed very upset by my journalism. So he's upset that I report about these procurements that go offline. And, for me, That's just reporting on where our tax dollars are going. So I don't understand that, what that big issue is. Now, I'll give you an example of like some of the things that people have accused me of doing, like Russian disinformation. So last year, Canadian forces were training Ukrainian troops in Poland. And the troops were not getting paid their allowances for their food. That was causing problems back home in the families, because then, there's less money. The spouses of these soldiers approached me, told me the story, and asked me if I could write a story. I wrote a story. It was brought up in the House of Commons, and like a week and a half later, these soldiers started getting their pay. But this appears to be, and then I started getting emails saying, well, you're embarrassing Canada, you're helping the Russians, gee, this is Russian disinformation. And so my response to this is, reporting on this type of thing, it's not Russian disinformation. If you don't want the Russians to use this information, then pay the soldiers properly. So that is the issue here, and not everything is Russian disinformation because it might embarrass the Canadian forces or the government of the day. And the sense I got from him, he seemed very perturbed about my reporting.
And just like speaking of Russian disinformation, you've probably heard that in our last meeting we had Ms. Lauren Chen here as a witness. And she and her husband and her company, Tenant Media, are named in a U.S. indictment as having been the recipients of several $1 million from Russia today. We asked her a lot of questions, and she came back with the same standard answer. But just for you as a journalist who does all of this incredible investigative work, just talk a little bit about the challenges when you're dealing with social media companies that don't have journalistic standards and practices, no internal code of ethics that guide how they report on truthful events.
Sure. I mean, thank you, Madam Chairman. So,
just a brief
as
response,
much as people,
please, Mr. Puglisi, just a brief answer, please.
Dislike my journalism, you have a place to go. So, the Ottawa Citizen, you can complain to my editor. You can take me to the National Press. Press Council and file a complaint. With these other organizations, you can't. And so, that is the difference between myself and some of these other entities you're running into.
Thank you, Mr. Puglisi.
The one thing I pride myself
our time is up on this
I'm
round. I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Sorry.
Our time is up in this round. Perhaps Mr. Lloyd will allow you to finish your comments there. I apologize for interrupting. Mr. Lloyd, you have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I will say at the outset that the meeting where these allegations were made was very bizarre, and not having adequate time to review these documents before really minimized the opportunity to really focus in on them. And so I'm going to actually take that opportunity right now to go into these documents and ask you some questions. The documents, which I assume you've read the documents, Mr. Puglisi. The documents first appears to be written in about August or September of 1984, and it says the subject, Stuart, was permanently residing in Ottawa at the time. Were you residing in Ottawa in 1984?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. No, I was not residing in Ottawa at that time.
Okay, thank you for that. In a later document, it says that in 1989 and 1990, the subject, Stuart, began active work at the Ottawa Citizen newspaper. Is that the time that you began active work at the Ottawa Citizen?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, that is correct, and that information is available online. Just to add, the documents also stated, one of the other documents also stated in 1988 I was permanently in Ottawa. That is false.
Says in another document, born and residing in Canada, student activist. Were you a student activist?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. No, I wasn't a student activist.
And the reason I'm asking this is these are very specific things.
Sure,
and,
sure.
if somebody's putting this together, they must have done some research in with you. Wouldn't you agree that the best disinformation always has an element of truth in it?
I would agree, except this time they didn't seem to do a very good job.
Yeah.
as I mentioned previously, student activist. Well, if you take a look at my writings, at one point in the 80s, I was writing for a Canadian Armed Forces journal, or a Canadian Armed Forces publication. So
Those are kind of hotbeds for communists, those armed forces journals?
Yeah, no, so my work in the 1980s would not be described as an op-ed for communists. They would probably be described as pro-military, pro-NATO, anti-Russian, anti-Soviet.
Another part of the document here says that the subject steward expressed a loyal attitude towards Soviet Union policy. Have you had a loyal attitude towards the Soviet Union's policy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I have not had any pro-Soviet attitudes.
Do you think that looking at Russia as it is today versus what Russia was in the time of the Soviet Union, do you think that it's even ideologically consistent for somebody who was loyal to the Soviet Union to necessarily be loyal to what the current iteration of the Russian state looks like?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously, the Soviet Union from the 1980s it could be arguably described as far, far different than what's going on in Russia right now. I don't have the, I don't have the knowledge, but they're totally two different entities.
Given that you've had access to these documents, have you had an opportunity to send them off for verification or to be, debunked by a third party? Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I mean, the committee was given photocopies, I believe, so it's hard to send photocopies off. And quite frankly, I view the documents as ridiculous.
Yeah. I just find it, I don't think Mr. Alexander came up with these documents on his own, so obviously somebody put together these documents. Do you have any idea of who might have put together these documents and what their motivations might have been?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I can't get into details. However, I am in the midst of a civil lawsuit for $7 million that, you know what, I think our lawyer would prefer that I don't go further into that. But, yeah.
Okay. How do you think we can improve resilience against foreign influence in a way that doesn't compromise press freedom?
That's a good point. I think you have to go through a prism of, you have to carefully look at what's being presented. Just because I write an article about sexual assault in the Canadian Forces, and that. Oh, sorry.
I'm so sorry to cut you off. The time is up, but perhaps the Liberal member, Mr. Gahir, may allow you to, but I'll leave that to him. He has 5 minutes. Mr. Gahir, go right ahead.
Great. Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Palese, for appearing before committee. I echo comments by my colleagues that say that we were shocked by the testimony that took place on the 24th by Mr. Alexander, and I'm sure you were equally shocked. He made these allegations before committee where parliamentary privilege obviously applies. Are you aware of Mr. Alexander making these allegations anywhere else?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, he has not repeated these allegations outside your committee.
And if he were to make these allegations outside the security of privilege, would you sue?
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this point, I'm just trying to make sure that my family's safe, and then I just want to get back to journalism, which hopefully I can do next week. And so I can't really go into that. Thank you.
Okay. So earlier this week, our committee heard testimony from Lauren Chen, the founder of Tenet Media, the organization currently at the heart of the U.S. indictment into Russian interference and disinformation. So when accusations like that are thrown against journalists, obviously we live in an environment, thanks in part to our neighbor from the south, where legacy media, mainstream media is constantly criticized and mistrusted. What do you think it's doing in terms of eroding the trust in actual journalists when those kinds of claims are made against legacy media?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, we're in a new world when it comes to social media, and anyone can say anything. For instance, there was an individual who obviously had advanced warning about what was going to go down in your committee, who was tweeting 1 hour before you even started that these explosive testimony would happen. About a prominent Canadian journalist. The same individual, the minute that your committee started, popped these documents up on social media. We're in a different world here. So in the 90s, I was accused of being a CIA agent by peace groups. When I was covering the Afghan war, some parliamentarians said I was a Taliban sympathizer. Now fast forward to 2024, I'm a Russian spy. I'm living this exciting life. The difference this time is these allegations against journalists because of social media are just rocket everywhere. And that's the difference. So in the 90s when I'm a CIA agent, that's just coming from a bunch of disarmament groups. But now it's a whole different world.
Chair, how much time do I have? 2 minutes, okay. In your role as a journalist, have you ever spoken with representatives of the Russian embassy in Canada regarding a potential story?
So, thank you, Madam Chair. So, in my role as a journalist, probably about 8 years ago, I've done 3 stories where the Russian embassy is quoted. So 2 emailed statements, which were put in the story, and then the main story, which is a telephone conversation with the Russian embassy spokesman who was booted out of Canada by the Liberal government. So that was a voice interview.
Great, thank you. So we know that when testifying before our committee, Rachel Curran, Meta's lobbyist and former director of policy to Stephen Harper, said that Meta had to remove news from Facebook and Instagram in Canada because under the Online News Act, they would be forced to pay approximately $80 million a year. And I quote, content that had no particular commercial value to us, end quote. For those keeping track at home, last year Meta made $134 billion in revenue. $80 million is 0.05% of Meta's annual revenue. Do you think that 0.05% of revenue, which is a rounding error, is it too much to ask global tech giants to pay for Canadian news?
I can answer that. Absolutely not. I think Meta's actions in the wake of the Online News Act were cowardly. I think they backed away as soon as possible because they understood that there was going to be a lot of potential liabilities based on what was going on in the United States, in the election that just took place. And so they didn't really want to be in that game. And it became a question of dollars and cents, and it didn't matter to them. I mean, I think that reflects the public service mandate or their interest in serving the public. So, I mean, 0.5% rounding error. I'm biased. I'm a journalist.
And that's all the time we have in this round.
Fair enough.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Gahir. Now we have 2.5 minutes going to Ms. Michaud. Go ahead.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you once again, Madam Chair. I'd like to come back on the question I was leading with a while ago. An open letter was published signed by a number of journalists to come to your defense, who came to your defense. Either Mr. Alexander should provide solid proof of his allegations, or apologize to you. Did you have any contact, or did he contact you at all? This war against you or Canadian journalists. He seems that a lot of journalists are supporting you and your position, and he should apologize. What do you think of that?
I don't expect an apology from him, Mr. Alexander. It was a good boost for me to see those journalists and academics. I think there's 56 come to my support, and Brent with the CAJ and a number of other organizations. Yeah, I don't see that. I don't see him apologizing. But quite frankly, when I look back at the testimony, he was telling your committee that I was intimidating a member of parliament. And I guess that's what, I found incredible. So not only I'm essentially, he accused me of 2 criminal acts, one of being a traitor, and 2 of threatening a member of parliament who I don't even know. I've used the word unhinged, and I'm going to use it again. I do not know his motives. I don't know what was going through his head. I'm sorry.
Je vous remercie. Peut-être une question pour...
Thank you. Perhaps a question for Mr. Jolly. You qualified Mr. Alexander's comments as dangerous during a period that we're trying to fight and contest misinformation, disinformation. What would be the consequences for journalism in general?
I think that it sows distrust, it sows mistrust, it sows division, it makes people question what a journalist does and what their value is to society. And I think undermining that is a dangerous principle that we can't tolerate.
Thank you very much. Mr. McGregor, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Jolly, maybe I'll turn this question to you. So, I mean, we know like this committee has been heavily involved in the foreign interference file, and we know that several countries are actively working to sow discord here in Canada, and we can obviously see the result of that. In how our politics are playing out. And we know like various platforms have been carrying those messages. There's been talk about like how do we hold platforms accountable? How do we hold the people who are generating the content accountable? People like who are in Ms. Chen's position, social media giants like Meta, like X and Instagram and so on. But I guess like if you wanted to add to this conversation, because ultimately we've been looking at representatives from the whole spectrum, including our national security and intelligence agencies. But from your perspective, because you are knee-deep in this every single day with your profession, what kind of recommendations would you like to see in our report to the federal government in things that the federal government could concretely do to stop our foreign adversaries from sowing this kind of discord?
Yeah, I noticed. Thank you for the question. I noticed I was watching back some of the previous committee meetings just to kind of get a sense of where things were and get up to speed. And I particularly appreciated the idea behind some of the Scandinavian countries to ensure information resilience and public literacy on this. I think, that is something that I see every day is people don't understand the difference between a news report and an opinion article. Like even that, those are 2 completely different things, but for some reason that all sort of gets lumped into one because, it appeared in the Ottawa Citizen or whatever. And, it's all one and the same in people's view. And I think, journalists are by their nature storytellers. And I think we do a pretty abysmal job of telling our own story. What do we do? Why are we here? What is the purpose of journalists in a functioning democratic society? And I think if we can distill that, that's a real win. Now, for what this committee can do, and it's provincial jurisdiction because God bless Canada and federalism, but information literacy, media literacy, news literacy curriculums, opportunities for that, that's where it's at.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to the last round, which, colleagues, I will shorten by 1 minute just to keep us on time so that we have 2 4-minute rounds. Mr. Motz, go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you to be here, witnesses. I appreciate you coming here. Now, given the information that you've shared with committee members and on your testimony, you have steps that you take to maintain journalistic integrity. So could you kind of explain, and from both of you, how do you go about doing that to unknowingly, spread potential disinformation from any foreign actor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I am I approach my journalism from a lot of it is record-based. So when a Canadian Forces person comes to me and says, this is happening to me, the first thing I say is, please provide me with your records. And usually they give me a lot of records. And so, personnel reports or access to information, privacy reports, official government documents. Then I go to the Department of National Defense. And so there's a checks and balance issue here. And so I say, this individual is saying this, and Department of National Defense will come back. Usually they'll say, yes, that's happening. And I'll say, please comment, and away we go.
Okay, well, thank you, and I appreciate that. I know, so basically, to summarize, you ask for documentation, and then, you source your sources.
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. So from a broader Canadian perspective, so based on both your experiences, what indicators should Canadians be looking for and watching out for to identify potential disinformation campaigns originating from any foreign hostile state?
There's a sense of critical thinking above all, I think, is the most foundational ingredient to be able to debunk ridiculousness like we just saw here. And it heartens me to hear that, after the committee's had a chance to think through it or review the documents, that, they don't really, pass muster.
I'm going to ask you to repeat that. Your mic wasn't on at the front end. You mentioned, so it's not going to show up for Canadians to hear. You said Canadians should employ critical thinking.
Absolutely. We need Canadians to be able to be able to decipher truth, from falsehood. Critical thinking is foundational, and I don't know where we're going to be able to do that. I think the point about the education system, but we have 13, every province and territory, but we're not teaching that, and that's
digital literacy is important.
Absolutely, it's a core principle, just like mathematics is, just like an understanding of how biology works. You are navigating. People are on their smartphones right now. You are engaging in an environment where there is warfare going on right now, and you need to have the tools to be able to fight back against that. And if you don't, if you come with twigs and figs or something, you're gonna lose, and you're gonna see misinformation and disinformation campaigns. You're going to see things like we saw down the street here a couple of years ago with the Freedom Convoy and all kinds of deleterious social things. So immunize.
Thank you very much. I appreciate both of your testimonies. Madam Chair, if I could, in the seconds that I have left, I'd like to move a motion about this study, if I could. And it is as follows. That once the committee has conducted 8 meetings on the study of Russian interference and disinformation campaigns in Canada, the committee proceed to the following matters in order. Number 1, the committee concurrently undertakes allotting alternating meetings of not fewer than 6 meetings each. Its agreed upon study on the rise in violent crime and a study examining how addressing gaps in community mental health and substance use health supports, including preventative and early intervention services, can improve public safety in Canada, that both the Minister of Public Safety and the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions be invited to testify separately for 1 hour each on this study, that the committee report its findings and recommendations to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive report or response to the report. And then lastly, number 2, the committee invite the Minister of Public Safety and the Minister of Immigration to appear before the committee as soon as possible pursuant to the motion passed on September 19th, 2024.
Thank you, Mr. Motz. Mr. Shipley, any other hands?
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, I appreciate the motion Mr. Motz has brought forward today. I would just like to add to that one thing that really maybe you missed in your list was, and particularly relevant this week, is back in December 2023, this committee undertook a very, very serious and a very heartfelt study on Paul Bernardo, and we haven't finished that yet, Chair. So I know you're not our normal chair, but I just want to get on the record for that. I really do think we need to get back to that, especially when his parole issue is coming up again. I'm sure the families, the French and Mahaffey families, would like some closure on that document. So I'd like to put that on there too, that Canadians want answers, and we really do need to finish that study.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley. Are you moving a sub-amendment, or is that just a point addition?
Just
Addition. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Madam Clerk, have you been able to distribute that?
I'm working on it right
You are working on it, and I believe we have hard copies for everyone in both languages. Has that been provided? We have it here. Thank you very much. If we can distribute that. Colleagues, if there's any further comments about the motion, we'll make sure we see it. But I just want to see if we need to let the witnesses go. I don't want to hold them here while if there's going to be a lot of discussion, or if we want to, just want to see, did you guys want to, when you take a look at it, do you want to talk about it, obviously? Yeah, okay. So our hour is up. We really do, as a committee, appreciate you coming to bring your perspective, Mr. Puglisi and Mr. Jolie. Thank you very much, and very sincerely, we do very sorry to hear about what you've been going through, Mr. Puglisi, and thank you for coming to share your side of the story. We appreciate it, and if there's anything further, please let the chair know, and we hope that all will be well with you. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Madam
You
Chair.
are dismissed for now. We will suspend briefly so that parties can review the motion. Thank you. I need to be a bit more. Gregor, I believe you wanted to speak to the motion. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You'll be next.
If you'll just give me a second here.
Just one moment, Mr. McGregor. I'm so sorry, but our folks in the back there, if we could just take it outside, I apologize for interrupting you, but we're needing to resume here now. Thank you. No, we're not.
Or not. Oh, yes. Good.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry for interrupting.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. When I first read through this, I think my opinion on the motion is that I think most of it's okay, but I would like in the first part to have a very clear reference to the two very important studies that are before this committee, because let's face it, foreign interference is a very clear and present danger to Canada right now. So I would like to have reference to both the Russian interference and disinformation campaign in Canada, but also to the electoral interference and criminal activities in Canada by agents of the government in India. So I suppose how I would change that first paragraph is I would say, I'll read it slowly, I'm just kind of going off the cuff here. I would say that once the committee has concluded the study on Russian interference and disinformation campaigns in Canada and the study of electoral interference and criminal activities in Canada by agents of the government in India, the committee proceed to the following matters in order. And I'm fine with the rest of it. I'm not sure if I want to specify the exact number of meetings at this point, because I think we as a committee need to kind of figure out how many more we're going to need. So that would be my amendment to this motion.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Ms. O'Connell on a point of order.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I wanted to hear Mr. McGregor's amendment, but regardless of that, this motion did not have notice of motion, and we were not on the topic of violent crime, and we were not on the topic of immigration. So I would argue this motion is actually not in order.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. It is related to the Russia interference disinformation campaign directly, so I would argue that it is in order.
Sorry, where? Just because in the preamble it says once the Russia meetings are concluded.
She can go and then I'll respond.
Is that your ruling?
It would appear that the motion looks to have 8 meetings for Russia, so the opening is directly related to Russia. So in my opinion, it is.
Well, then I would challenge the chair.
Understood. So we'll have a vote.
So if we vote yes, we're,
Oh, my apologies. 1 second.
it just gets
You're
confusing.
sustaining her ruling
right.
if you vote yes.
So if you vote yes, you affirm my decision. If you vote no,
Yes.
you affirm
Okay, so
Ms.
we're yes.
O'Connell's position.
That's
Okay, so yes supports what I said and no doesn't. Okay.
Shall the decision of the chair be sustained? Yes, I'm
Then
calling.
Call the names.
You have to call.
Yes, call the vote.
Yes, I'm going to call the names in a moment.
Yes.
I'm asking the question first.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Come on.
Ms. Damoff.
Just ignore Ms.
Mr. Gahir. Mr. Shahal.
No.
Ms. O'Connell.
No.
Dr. Fry.
No.
Mr. Lloyd.
In favor.
Mr. Motts.
Yes.
Mr. Shipley.
Yes.
Madame Michaud.
En faveur.
Mr. McGregor.
Yes.
So we have a tie, and I'm the tiebreaker, so I vote
It's
yes.
sustained.
Yes, right? Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Motts.
I'd just like to add, as the mover of this motion, I will accept Mr. McGregor's amendment as a friendly amendment.
There's no such thing as a friendly amendment.
It's okay.
You have to,
It's okay, Eddie. It's okay.
So I'm just going to confirm with the clerk how we distribute this sub-amendment. Give me a moment. It's not required that it be provided in writing, but I will ask Mr. McGregor just to repeat one more time, slowly for the interpreters, and when he is able to provide in writing as perhaps the conversation continues. Thank you.
Certainly, I'll read it very slowly. So the new amended, and I'm really only amending that first paragraph, it would read as follows: that once the committee has concluded both the study on Russian interference and disinformation campaigns in Canada and the study on electoral interference and criminal activities in Canada by agents of the Government of India. The committee proceed to the following matters in order.
So, Chair, I'd like,
Thank you very much.
we need those in both
Ms.
official
O'Connell, I
languages.
did not call on you, but I don't see other hands, so you may go.
Well, it's a point of order. We'd like that amendment in both official languages. That is the practice of this committee.
The clerk will be providing it momentarily.
Suspend until we have it in our email boxes and so that Dr. Fry also can receive it.
Ms. O'Connell, I am the chair. We'll decide if we suspend. Are there anyone else that would like to speak to the amendment while we distribute it? Okay. Thank you very much. All right, so we have a motion on the table, and then, oh, did you put your hand up? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ms. Demoff.
Sorry,
Oh, my apologies, Ms.
I'm
O'Connell.
confused here. So are we suspended while we get it, or are we speaking to the
We are
amendment?
speaking to the amendment while we wait to receive it.
Point of order.
Would you like, go ahead, Ms. O'Connell.
That is not the practice of this committee, that we always
Hear, hear.
receive, we always receive amendments and we suspend until we can receive amendments in writing in both official languages. So if you're choosing to ignore the official languages of this committee, that seems to be a pattern with the Conservative Party, but that is the practice of this committee, and we would like both official languages in writing and to not continue until we receive those amendments.
On the 4 different committees I have been on, there are times where that is adhered to and times that there is not. We will ensure there's no vote on it till everyone receives it, but if others would like to speak to the motion, we will continue to speak. But I will ensure that there is not a vote until everyone has had a chance to review it. When the clerk sends it out, we will suspend momentarily for the review. It doesn't look like anyone wants to speak anyway, so if we could, we're just going to make sure everyone is fine not to speak to the amendment at this point until it is received. Getting a nod from Ms. Michaud. Right, Louise? I know. How are we doing? Receive it in about 30 seconds, so we will spend for 30 seconds until everyone receives it. Languages. Are there any comments? Ms. Damoff.
I have not received it. I have not received it in either official language.
Thank you, Ms. Fry. We will ensure. The clerk is going to send it to you now. Thank you.
I am not a P9 for the clerk's information. I'm an M1. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fry. Ms. Damoff.
Thanks, Chair. It's a question mostly for It's a question for my colleague who has moved the amendment that we're speaking to, because again, it's just in the preamble. I quite frankly was shocked at the testimony we've heard so far on the India study, and I think the last meeting was probably one of the most difficult meetings I've had to listen to, when we had, one of the witnesses talk about his experience. And I don't like limiting. We may hold, I don't remember what we agreed to on India. I think it was 6 meetings. But we may find at the end of that 6 meetings that there's still more information that we want to hear. In fact, I mean, it was your party who brought a motion to set up a whole new committee on it. If we pass this motion, we're going to be limited because we've only agreed to do a study of 6 meetings. So how are we going to extend either the Russia or the India study if the committee so chooses to, if we pass this motion? It's a concern I've got on what we're doing. So I just would like some clarity on that. Because it seems like we're committing, you've said once we finish the study on India, right now finishing the study on India is actually 6 meetings. So it doesn't give us flexibility if we choose to extend either or both of these meetings.
Sorry, Mr. McGregor, go ahead.
I can answer Ms. Damoff's questions. Fair points. I do believe that the motion that I brought forward that started the investigation into India's interference in Canada did state no fewer than 6 meetings, so it's open. And my amendment to the motion brought forward by Mr. Motz simply uses the word concluded. It's totally up to this committee as to when we feel it's concluded. And I agree with you. There may be more witnesses that we want to hear. We always have the ability to extend our meetings for that. But I do think that there are other things that this committee does need to look at. Foreign interference is absolutely important, and that is why I have prioritized both the Russian study and the Indian study. And I would disagree. It's not a part of the preamble. Everything after the word "that" is part of the actual motion. So if we adopt this, that's not a preamble, that's actually a directive that we have to complete these 2 before we move on to everything else. So I am putting priority on those through the amendment. I do agree with you that they should have priority, and I will support that. But I also cannot ignore the fact that in many small communities right across Canada, there are serious concerns about mental health and its intersection with public safety. And that's why I would also like to see us in a motion commit to studying those at some point in the future. So I'll leave it at that, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Ms. Michaud.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Chair. Well, there might be a bit of a problem with this motion, as Mr. McGregor has just mentioned. Nothing indicates that the Indian interference report is limited to or is obliged to go through a certain number of meetings. In the last few weeks, we have tried to develop a calendar for the meetings of this committee, but we have to at least take a look at the motions that we have carried earlier. The second hour was supposed to be on the automobile theft report or discussion. And I would perhaps suggest that we add in this that we have to finish what we've got before we go on to something else. But if we can adopt this motion quickly, I'm prepared to accept it as is so that we can get on with the other vehicle theft report. Dr. Fry.
I did not see your hand. I apologize. I'll go to you next.
Sorry, I don't want to interfere, but I just know that the rules would say that basically if this motion, and I know the chair ruled on it, this motion just uses Russia in the preamble. It is about two different things, and it should be given 48 hours notice in both official languages before it is discussed by the committee.
Thank you, Ms. Fry. Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Chair. Well, it's incredibly disappointing. I understand the amendments help make this motion a little bit better. We've already acknowledged that I think there are serious issues and concerns around whether or not, and Dr. Fry's also talked about the procedural elements of this, but it's fine if the Conservatives want to take the chair today and completely shut down the ability to continue our study on India, to limit our study on Russia. I mean, it fits within the Conservatives' approach. We had, as a committee, by majority vote, determined our next steps, which was Mr. McGregor's India motion. We were the foreign interference of India. We are just getting into some of that testimony. The Russian study, the testimony we just heard today with, I think, really compelling information around journalism and how journalists are being targeted. And before we even concluded the full hour of that, we had Conservatives reprogramming the plan to try and avoid continuing that testimony or that study. So when it comes to the amendment itself, while I recognize Mr. McGregor's attempts to, again, at least include it, I think the fact that the first version didn't make any mention to our studies around India should be very, very concerning for the community. We saw that Conservatives, during our study on foreign interference on India, did not ask questions around India's involvement.
Mr. Lloyd.
I just want to clarify that this committee had already agreed on the meetings to India, so it was viewed as needlessly repetitive to include that in there because we were going to be conducting these meetings on India, but we did support the friendly amendment brought forward by Mr. McGregor, and we have no problems with continuing that study.
That's not a point of order.
Thank you, Ms. That is up to me, Ms. O'Connell. Ms. O'Connell, you may resume your time or your time to speak.
Thank you. Well, I mean, we can clearly see how this is going to go. The committee can just be, points of orders will now just be debate because they don't like me calling out the fact that Conservatives didn't ask about India's involvement that have been outlined by community members through testimony, the RCMP press conference, and instead, actually, it was Mr. Motz who asked about criminals in India seemed to be of a higher importance than actually what Canadians were feeling in this country. So to add it as a sub-amendment to this motion, I think does a real disservice to the very compelling testimony that we heard. It feels like a slapped on, saving face for a motion that clearly is drawn up by Conservatives who don't want to talk about India interfering in our democratic institutions, the allegations around violence in our communities being organized with organized crime from India deeply into our communities. The fact that it was left out of this motion, I don't think is a mistake. The fact that Conservatives would like to move away from that study is not surprising given how...
Mr. Motz.
I think there needs to be a limit on the amount of patently false information that an individual could speak at any committee. And what we're hearing spewed at this current moment is certainly patently false.
Mr. Motz, thank you, but let's make sure that we are being specific on our complaints.
My hand is up, Chair.
Yes, Ms. O'Connell is still speaking, Ms. Fry, but I have you on the list after Mr. Chahal. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you. Again, if we if we had rules on misinformation being spread by Conservative Party, we would never be able to conduct any meetings. It's more of an uncomfortable situation. I think they also made the mistake of hoping to do this motion in camera, but unfortunately forgot that we were still in camera, and now Canadians are going to see that they put forward a motion without any mention of foreign interference, our study on foreign interference on India. It was Mr. McGregor's amendment that at least acknowledged that, which I'm speaking to right now. But the fact that this motion came prepared without mention of it, I think should send shockwaves to our community, to the Sikh community, to several other communities who have been raising alarm bells about the violence that they have experienced. And again, to see Conservatives put forward a motion completely ignoring the very damning testimony that we heard and the very concerning testimony. Something that moved me was Mr. Moninder Singh's testimony, where he spoke about the fact that there were threats of violence made towards him and his family, that it almost, security became, and I'm paraphrasing here, but security to him almost became like difficult to imagine and understand anymore because of how serious these threats were. The thought that you have to think about, he mentioned about being around other people, including us in this room, and what that meant to the safety and security to people who weren't even involved in some of, the allegations and the things that, he was being targeted for. So the fact that he had to worry about even coming here in person for his own personal safety, and we are the Public Safety and National Security Committee, and we are going, and the suggestion was here today, was to move away from that study, to ignore those concerns. Mr. Matt's shaking his head no, but the motion presented had no mention of India and foreign interference and the testimony we had heard. Frankly, I feel that the testimony we heard was just getting started. We had just heard from our public safety, national security advisors. We had a few community members. I've mentioned already one, Mr. Moninder Singh and others, but we were really just getting started. And so to program away from that, I find deeply concerning. I know of community members myself, but certainly I think my colleagues from the GTA and certainly Vancouver and British Columbia are seeing firsthand and have probably heard from their community of the very real threats. Conservatives in the House often raise the issue of extortion, but don't raise the issues around and the allegations laid out by the RCMP around extortion being used as a form of foreign interference by the Modi government, that has been linked to organized crime, and yet no mention of any of that. The Public Safety National Security Committee and no mention of that until Mr. McGregor brought forward this amendment. I think we all should be deeply, deeply worried that Conservative members could hear that testimony and say, no, that's enough, let's move on. It makes me wonder, because we also heard testimony, I think, from every single witness that was asked, should the leader of the opposition receive his security clearance so that he could properly get the full briefing and the scope of the information around the foreign interference of India and the attempts against our democracy? Every single witness said yes, every single witness. So it shouldn't really be a surprise to anyone that now Conservatives bring forward a motion completely ignoring completely ignoring that testimony. There have been questions raised in the media
Point of order,
around
Chair.
the conservative.
Mr. Shipley.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to point out that obviously there's a filibuster going on right now and preventing this committee from doing any work and studying some very serious issues that we've all discussed around this country right now. And I think that's a bit of a shame on behalf of the Liberals.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley. That is not a point of order, but we will go to Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you, Chair. I won't apologize for standing up for our communities who have been threatened with violence. Conservatives want to change the channel and moved a motion. They want to fight with me now because...
Madam Chair.
Mr. Lloyd, please.
I just, something that Ms. O'Connell said, that there's no mention of India in this motion. I'm a bit confused because it does talk about India in the motion. Can the chair clarify to the committee that we are talking about India in this motion?
Just a point of clarification. It has not been amended. It does say India. So technically you are correct, Mr. Lloyd. Ms. O'Connell?
The amendment brought forward by Mr. McGregor prioritize.
Why did you oppose the inclusion of India?
We have not
Through the chair,
voted, have
please.
we?
Let's get to it.
Well, of course, the Conservatives
Many
would
members-
love
They
don't
to
want to
get to
vote
that.
to include
Just
it.
a moment, please. Please, committee members through the chair, please. Thank you. Point of order, Mr. Hall. Mr. Chahal, pardon me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My colleague, Mr. Connell, is just trying to provide a speech, and I find it quite disrespectful that a number of colleagues turned on the mics at the same time. I know it's hard for interpreters to interpret when a number of members are speaking, so I would just ask one member at a time so the member can speak and be heard, and members can express their point of orders individually if required.
Thank you, Mr. Chahal. It is an important suggestion. I don't believe that's a point of order either. Ms. O'Connell?
Thank you. Like I said, I'm not surprised. It's going to continue to happen. I'm going to be interrupted quite a lot because that was the intention of the original motion, that not for the fact that Mr. McGregor moved an amendment, the original motion made no mention of our study on foreign interference in India. I believe Mr. McGregor is very sincere in wanting to continue that study. Unfortunately, the Conservatives have brought forward a motion with zero mention of it. And then they want to say that they care too until the writing is here in front of us in black and white, and their intentions are very clear. So it is a huge disservice to the testimony we've heard, the serious nature of the allegations, the fact that the Conservatives have yet to ask a question about the allegations of India's involvement in extortions, in a murder, in other violence, and in undermining our democratic institutions, purporting disinformation, misinformation. The Conservatives have yet to ask a single question in this study, so it should be of no surprise to any Canadians that they would like to program away from this. The other component, as I was speaking to before I was interrupted, again, shouldn't be any surprise, was the fact that witness after witness actually confirmed what I think we've all known and felt, was the fact that if a leader of an opposition who wants to be prime minister one day and wants to stand up for the safety and security of Canadians, then they should also want to get a security clearance so they can be properly briefed. And I think we had CSIS and others confirm that in order to get a proper briefing on the full extent of the foreign interference around the Indian government, was that a security clearance was the best way to do so. And it's incredibly cynical of politics and politicians when as soon as the Conservatives start getting criticized, instead of diving into these allegations, they say, let's change the channel. let's change the subject. And then they want to, raise points of order suggesting a filibuster. Well, again, I am not going to apologize for standing up for our communities. And I think Conservatives should be made to feel very uncomfortable by their actions here today. And I'm sure their constituents will let them know. But that's on them. Here we go.
Mr. Shipley.
Just a quick point of order. I'm very, very, very comfortable here today.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Shipley. Thank you.
Yeah, it was close.
Ms. O'Connell, were you done, or did you want me to go to Mr. Chahal is next?
That's great. I was not done.
That's
Thank
why I'm
you.
asking you, Ms. O'Connell.
Not a problem. They can keep interrupting. And again, we will continue to speak and stand up for our communities because this is what's deeply important. We've just started that testimony, and but for the fact of Mr. McGregor's amendment, the Conservatives have shown very clearly to all Canadians their intentions. I think that was an accident. I think they meant to do this in camera, but unfortunately, they've been able to show Canadians just exactly who they want to stand up for. So I will stop here, allow my other colleagues to speak, but I'd like to be re-added to the list on the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Mr. Chahal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess I have a few questions that come to mind right away off the top when this motion was dropped by my Conservative colleagues. And the first thought I had is, why do we want to avoid having this important conversation that this committee has been studying? And for me and my community members in Calgary Skyview, right now this is the most important issue that's affecting them, their families, their lives, their safety and well-being. So I find it quite insulting after we heard the testimony the other day at this committee, which I had the opportunity to sub in on, and hear from Mr. Muninder Singh and his really impacting testimony, and also Balpreet Singh from the World Sikh Organization. They both provided, I think, testimony that members of this committee should take to heart. And a part of that testimony, and I'm glad Mr. McGregor has brought in the amendment to clarify what I think the Conservatives were trying to do, to get away from studying foreign interference in our elections. The foreign interference, even the study today that Mr. Puglisi talked about, the impact on him by the disinformation or the attempts to discredit his work on bringing accountability and transparency to the Canadian public was an important conversation today on the impact of Russian disinformation. But to just skip over in this motion, prior to the amendment that the Conservatives brought forward, to not include India, the study that the Public Safety Committee is studying on the electoral interference and criminal activities in Canada by the agents of the government of India. It's my understanding that we've only had 2 of 6 meetings, and for Conservative members to avoid studying that important issue is quite insulting for Indo-Canadians, South Asians of Indian descent, or from the South Asian subcontinent, who have experienced foreign interference, not just over the last number of weeks, but for decades. Conservative members must know that we are, as members of the Sikh community, right now, 40 years of a Sikh genocide that occurred. 40 years. This was an important conversation that we had last evening, where men were murdered, women were raped, killed, burned alive. And for our community to live this horrific actions that took place 40 years ago is still something that members of the community are asking for justice. I was at an event last night with Mr. Singh, the leader of the NDP, very clearly stated how he intends to bring this forward to the House of Commons, which personally, as a member of the Sikh community, I stated that I think this is something that should be brought forward and that members of our parliament should consider supporting, and I hope unanimously do support once we see the motion he brings forward in the House of Commons. But the intent of it is extremely important, and it directly ties into the study we are studying on electoral interference and criminal activities in Canada by the agents of the government of India. At the last committee meeting that I sat at, I was astonished that Conservative members could not even utter those words, that they focused on duties to warn, potentially dangerous situations is what I heard. They did not talk about the impact on communities, of South Asian communities here in Canada. They did not utter one question to any of our witnesses on the impact of that foreign interference on them. I'm proud to say my members, my colleagues, all other parties from the Bloc, from the NDP, and the Liberal members did ask those tough questions and did hear from the testimony provided. I heard last night Mr. Jennis stated at the World Sikh Organization event of how the Conservative Party is taking this issue very, very seriously. And if folks were there, would have seen the crowd and their response to those comments. Members of the community are asking why the Conservative leader, Mr. Poilievre, will not get a security clearance, why he's avoided in getting a security clearance. But the Conservative member publicly last night said they take the issue of Indian interference in Canada seriously. And today we see the complete opposite. We see Conservative members trying to find a clever way, which wasn't very clever in my opinion, on trying to avoid studying one of the most important studies I would say that this committee is studying. It is one of, and I say one of because the study on auto theft that I think we're in the process of concluding at this is a very important study for folks in the GTA. I know members in the GTA want that study completed so that report could be brought back to the House. It is an issue that I hear from many friends and family members who live in the GTA on the importance of how to deal with auto theft. But then the issue that we've seen this committee study on Russian election interference and disinformation is also a very important study. But for me personally, we need to take election interference, foreign interference in our elections seriously. And I think if members of the Conservative Party want to avoid, they need to be clear on why they want to avoid studying foreign interference in Canadian elections. Now, is it what members stated last meeting? And for the members who weren't here from the Conservative Party on that day, our witnesses clearly said they have concerns about interference in the nomination races of the Conservative Party of Canada and the leadership campaign. Those are the words of the witnesses that attended, who provided important testimony at our last meeting. The impact on community members and communities was also raised at the last meeting. The suspension of security agreements was a concern brought forward, and I think we really need to dive a little bit deeper at this committee on how information is shared between our government and other governments. One of the members last meeting mentioned that they want a public inquiry into the assassination by Hardeep Singh Nijjar. For folks who don't know, that is the president of the Surrey Gurdwara who was assassinated on the Gurdwara premises last year. And recently, the RCMPs brought forward information showing they've arrested a number of individuals, but also shown that the government of India has had interference and has targeted many other Canadians, one being the witness who came to testify at this committee the other day. So why do Conservative members not want to have a conversation, not hear from witnesses that will shed light on what's happening here in Canada, on how Canadians are being targeted? But this targeting is not something that's just started happening over the last few weeks or the last year or the last few years. This has been going on for decades. Now, one of the members, and this is very important, Mr. Balpreet Singh, and I can read a quote, so I hope I can pull it up, but he did mention, and Mr. Maninder Singh mentioned this as well, anti-Sikh hate and what's occurring in Canada today on members of the Sikh community being targeted or labeled as terrorists. I had a Conservative MP call me a terrorist because I'm from the Sikh community, or because I support Calgarians who are asking for justice when their families are being killed in Gaza. Yes, I support those family members, those communities. Of course I do. But to target an individual, and that's me as a member of Parliament who's being targeted by Mr. Majumder, I find that shocking. But is that individual targeting other members as well of communities, calling them terrorists? That is promoting disinformation and misinformation, but that's also promoting hate.
Hate.
Towards members of our community. So as a member of the Sikh community, I find that quite offensive. And so the issue of anti-Sikh hate, that's one example that I can share from my own perspective. But when community members are threatened to go to their place of worship, as we've seen over the last number of days, whether you're from the Sikh community or the Hindu community, the fear within those communities, for Conservative members to try to cover this up by not studying the study, shameful. I would love to hear from the leader of the Conservative Party on why he's asked members of this committee to cover this up, why he won't get a security clearance, but why does he want to cover up this study that's being studied here at this committee? That's the job of this committee, to bring forward studies that, and then this study was agreed upon, to study the impacts, as this committee has done, on the impact of electoral interference and criminal activities in Canada by the agents of the government of India. Now, Mr. Balpreet Singh also left me some important information, I think, from the event I attended. And I want to go into the importance of why the World Sikh Organization, as one advocacy organization, has wanted to have a further conversation and provide information at this committee. And I'm lucky I have this information leaflet that really goes into detail on their advocacy efforts and why this disinformation campaign and promoting by foreign governments on anti-Sikh rhetoric and hate, it's something that we have to combat in Canadians, and I think maybe even with our study that we're having right now, should look into this, really seriously look into the impact on the members of the Sikh community. Now, there's a number of issues that come to mind. I could look at here and bring forward The RCMP case, freedom to wear a dastar. Many of you may not know what a dastar is. It's a turban. My colleague, Mr. Akwinder Gahir, next to me, proudly wears his dastar. But in the 1990s, the first member of the RCMP to wear a dastar was Baltej Singh Dhillon. Now, let me tell you, at that time, there was a big debate across this country on whether Mr. Dhillon should be allowed to wear his dastar in the RCMP. I can tell you who was trying to make sure he could not wear his dastar was members of the Conservative Party and the Reform Movement. They brought forward petitions to ensure that that member could not wear a turban in the RCMP. Well, I think for committee members, it's important to know that our former Prime Minister, Mr. Harper, wrote a letter asking Canadians and asking that, yes, oh, sorry. No, I don't need a break.
Just get a breath here.
Mr. Lloyd.
I just want to remind the committee that this House had the opportunity to set up a special committee on India so that we could discuss these important issues, and it was the Liberals that opposed that happening. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Chahal, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Lloyd, I would, it wasn't actually the reason why. I think we are studying here at this committee, and if you want to avoid having the conversation of Mr. Harper's involvement of publicly stating that he opposed this member of the Sikh community from wearing a dastar in the RCMP, that's a conversation we should have. But that's how hate toward the Sikh community is brought forward. I can tell you members of the community being threatened for wearing turbans at that time. I can tell you member of the Conservative Party brought forward a petition where many Canadians signed, unfortunately. That's our history. Many Canadians signed and opposed that member from wearing a turban in the RCMP. But I'm proud to say that the RCMP allowed that member. If you go to the RCMP Heritage Center in Regina, you will have the opportunity to see that dastar in showcased and the uniform of Mr. Baltej Singh Dhillon there. Now, why did members of the Conservative Party not want that individual to wear a dastar?
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Mr. Lloyd.
I just wanted on the record that in 1990 it was a Conservative government that lifted the ban on turbans with the RCMP. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Mr.
Well,
Lloyd.
the member.
That's not a point of order. Mr. Chahal.
I would ask Mr. Lloyd that why Mr. Harper publicly stated that he was against that. I would ask other members to do the same. I would ask why Mr. Polyev was a part of the Reform Party actively engaging to target this individual from being a member of the RCMP. Why members also were wearing pins that crossed out a member of the Sikh community who had a turban on, that were proudly wearing pins with a line through it. You know, as we think about the important work of the turban for that member, but also the history of Sikhs fighting for this nation, but fighting in World War I and World War II, wearing a turban, fighting on the front lines, putting their lives at risk for freedom of the Commonwealth, for freedom to them to be able to have the ability to practice their faith.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Mr. Lloyd.
I just want to say that I'm very proud that my colleague Tim Uppal, a member from Edmonton, was the first turban Sikh to sit in a cabinet in Canada under Stephen Harper. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. I recognize that emotions are running a bit high, colleagues. This is a sensitive topic. Obviously, it's been a number of weeks since our last constituency break. So let's just please take a breath and we will resume. Mr. Chahal.
I actually do have a
Ms. Demoff?
It's not a point of order. It's a question, though, Chair. When time do we have resources until?
We are just checking, but it sounds like from the response other committees are getting, a hard stop at 6.
Thank you.
Okay. Well,
Okay. That was not a point of order. You're correct, Mr. Lloyd. It was a point of clarification, which is sometimes allowed. Mr. Chahal, please resume your.
So as I speak with members of my community, particularly over the next number of days as we honor our veterans, and for me as a member of the Sikh community, has had members who fought for freedom in northern India, to be able to practice their religion but have the freedom of speech, and many who have fought for the Commonwealth in World War I and World War II, to have that ability and proudly come to this nation and be Canadian citizens and have the opportunity to fight for this nation, but also serve, whether it's members of Parliament, whether it's members of the police services across the country, whether it's member of our armed forces, and proudly do that wearing their turbans. I think it's important to also acknowledge, when I think about the important conversation we had last night, and reflecting with many community members, many of the concerns that are arising today with misinformation and disinformation, and that's why that study of the Russian misinformation, disinformation study that's occurring in this committee, but along with the study on electoral interference and criminal activities in Canada by the agents of the government of India, I think an important part of what we have not studied yet, have not got into, is exactly that. Who is pushing this information into the Canadian public to incite violence? Is it coming from domestic sources, or is it coming from international sources? I've been watching the news over the last number of days. I've been on social media. It's concerning for me when I see members of the Sikh community or the Hindu community who have concerns about going to their place of worship. And that is something we need to think about in this committee, and how they are getting information, or how other members of the community are being sent to target community members on their ability, and preventing them from being able to go to their place of worship. I remember as a child in Calgary, when the Sikh Society of Calgary, the first Gurdwara, was built in 1978, I was 3 years old. But over the years after that, how that Sikh temple was targeted regularly. Now, who was it targeted by at that time? There was targeting by members of our society who felt that people who looked a little different, like my parents and many of my relatives, were not welcomed, unfortunately. So the Sikh temple in southwest Calgary was targeted a number of times. As a child, my dad would go there and sleep overnight with many others to protect our place of worship. We seen in Northeast Calgary, when the Deshmish Cultural Center in my constituency was being built, was also targeted over numerous occasions. Now, what the Sikh communities tried to do over the number of years is to help Canadians who live in our city understand who we are as Sikh Canadians, and build interfaith bridges with other communities. And I have fond memories with collaboration that we've had with the Jewish community. I've had fond memories that the collaboration the Sikh communities had with the Hindu community in Calgary, and I get to represent, I would say, the most diverse riding in the country in Calgary Skyview, and I'd like to challenge anybody who thinks otherwise. The important collaboration between when we saw what happened.
Mr. Chahal, I'm sorry, if you just wrap up your last thought and then. Okay,
I have
well,
lots of thoughts. I still have.
appreciate that. And
I want to talk about the collaboration still with
thank
the
you,
SIC and
Mr. I just
Muslim
wanted to provide you a bit of a
communities.
courtesy rather than cutting you off, but
Yes.
unfortunately, we are way over time and out of resources, and so at this point, I will suspend, and we will resume this discussion the following Tuesday when we return from break. The meeting is suspended.